Good morning, and this is our 8th Academia Bessarion meeting. And this time we should be talking about our founder, in a sense, the Cardinal Bessarion, and following on having discovered his house in Rome with my first baby in my arms many, many years ago, and being enchanted by this house of a scholar with a library in a garden. I'm going to be asking in an Italian version of this for the participation of Concetta Bianca, who wrote Da Bisanzio a Roma, Studi sul Cardinale Bessarion. And she was introduced to me by friends of Lisa Dwan, who is the Irish actress, whose Nose Knife by Samuel Beckett I saw in the Abbey Theatre. Basilius Bessarion was born in Trebizond in 1403, and he died like Dante, coming home from embassy in Ravenna in 1472. He was born in poverty, educated in Constantinople. At 1423, he went to Egypt and then to Sparta to study Neoplatonism, and then at the court of John Palaeologus VIII. He next participated with John Palaeologus at the Council of Ferrara in 1437, which then went on to Florence because of the plague, because like COVID virus. And it was there that he read 6th of July in 1439, the declaration of the union of the Orthodox and Catholic churches in Florence's Duomo. But unfortunately, when he returned to Constantinople, he met with opposition. So he came back to Italy in 1440, and we find him in places like Ravenna, Florence, Rome, Messina, Grottaferrata, one of his titles being the Bishop of Tuscolo, which is, of course, associated with Cicero, who had himself defined happiness as being a library in a garden. In 1453, his intent to prevent the fall of Constantinople was dashed. Turks captured the city. And then in 1461, the last part of the Greek Empire, Trebizond, his own beloved home, fell to the Ottoman Turks. In 1468, Bessarion presented his library of 487 Greeks and 264 Latin manuscripts to the Doge Cristoforo Moro of the Republic of Venice, initiating the Biblioteca Marciana. And I love that library. I can remember sitting at the table with a Brunetto Latino manuscript and the wind riffling its pages, while outside you could hear the cries of the hawkers and also of the seagulls in this wonderful sea air. In 1472, he went on embassy to Louis XI of France, hoping to persuade him to participate in a crusade to rescue Constantinople for Christianity. And on his return, he died in Ravenna in the house of Antonio Dandolo. He is buried as he intended in the Santi Apostoli Church in Rome, which had been his cardinalate church. And that took place the 12th of 1472. He had taken the name Bessarion from the Abba Bessarion of Egypt, who was the disciple of the saints Anthony and Macarius, because the Desert Fathers were those who presented Christianity in its most ascetic forms throughout both East and West Christendom. And the monks, for instance, the Benedictine monks, would read from the Lives of the Fathers or the Paradise of the Fathers in the refectories while they dined apart from the reader in silence, the reader receiving his meal separately. In the story of the Abba Bessarion of Egypt, when a brother was thrown out of a church by a priest for a sin, Bessarion also rose and went out, saying, "If you judge this man who has committed only one sin as unworthy to worship God, how much less worthy am I, who have committed many sins, to stay?" I have done this in Florence, where a Roma has been excluded from communion because the Catholic priest has not understood that the Roma has a very deep, profound faith, fasts before taking communion in a way much more severe than we do now. And I have said to priests on these occasions, if he is to be excluded, then I will also excommunicate myself. And in so doing, I have won the right for the inclusion of the Roma. This is Constantinople, where first Bessarion was educated before going on to Egypt, and to which he then returned. This is in a Crusader map. You can see it's in Latin. While amongst Bessarion's own manuscripts is this wonderful drawing of Africa, and you can see here where he writes Libya in Greek. And we have amongst his manuscripts both Greek and his handwriting in Latin is even more beautiful. So we have him here. Let's see if I can go back one. Here he is in Constantinople, then down to Egypt, then to Greece, then to Constantinople, then to Florence and Rome and Venice and Ravenna and so forth. In 1474, there had earlier been the Ecumenical Council of Lyon with Pope Gregory X, Emperor Michael Palaeologus VIII, the earlier emperor, to unite Orthodox and Catholic churches against Charles of Anjou's planned crusade against Christian Constantinople to loot her for her wealth, as already the Latin Crusaders had done, but which the Emperor Michael had managed to win her back again. At the same time, he was confronting the threat of Islam. Brunetta Latino and Gianni di Procida and the Emperor Michael and the popes in Rome, except Martin, who was French, and the Aragonese and the Genoese all conspired together to prevent this crusade while Charles was building up his massive fleet. And they were able to instigate on the 30th of March, which was Easter Monday, 1282, the Sicilian Vespers, which caused Charles to lose half of his kingdom. He still maintained that of Naples. He was titular head of the kingdom of Jerusalem, but he had lost Sicily. And it's interesting that soon after, 1296 until 1436, Florence builds the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, which is in imitation of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Florence had already, with Dante's Vita Nuova, and so forth, subsumed the concept of Florence as Jerusalem. Now it was subsuming the concept of Florence as Constantinople. In 1437, the year after the completion of the building of the cathedral, we have the Council of Ferrara, moving then to Florence in January 1439 because of plague in Ferrara, with Pope Eugene IV, Emperor John Michael August VIII, and then in June 1439, Patriarch Joseph of Constantinople dies and is buried in Florence's baptistry. We will find his portrait in the Benozzo Gozzoli fresco. And then in 1439, the 6th of July, L'Aitento Celi is read by Bessarion in the Duomo in Greek and signed by all but one of the delegates in the Duomo. In my researches of Brunetto Latino, so much earlier, 200 years earlier, I was finding that this was typical of treaties made by the Florentines with other cities, states around them, Siena and so forth, that they would read the treaty in Santo Reparato or San Lorenzo and so forth to the ringing of bells so that all the citizens would participate democratically in this act of peace. If it were war, it would be done on the battlefield to the sound of trumpets. And here we see again, much later, this L'Aitento Celi, not just between Florence and Siena or another city-state, but the entire of Christendom, all of the Greek and the Latin states ecumenically coming together. Unfortunately, it won't last. So here we see the Duomo completed in 1436. And in 1439, within it, you have the reading of this document. Santa Maria del Fiore was the largest church in Christendom, capacity of 30,000 people, and its arrival to Constantinople's Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, and Athens' Parthenon. Florence is assuming the role of being the dispenser of Platonic wisdom. Benozzo Gozzoli, pupil of Fra Angelico, painted these frescoes in the Palazzo Medici Ricciardi in 1439-1461 about both the Epiphany feast of the three kings, the Magi, and the 1438-1444 Council of Ferrara and Florence. Here are the three Magi, the three kings. The first is a portrait of the Patriarch Joseph, who died prematurely before the council was finished. Next is the Emperor Michael Palaeologus. And then the third is a Medici princeling. The Medici were the upstart wealthy family of subiti guadagni, despised by the primo popolo, despised generally by the Florentines who hated being ruled by a tyrant. And yet this wealth was being used for sort of realpolitik. This is the part with the Patriarch of Constantinople. He is riding a donkey because Christ never rode a horse. Let's go back. Okay. And if you stand over on your left-hand side, you can join up the rear end of the donkey with the front end of the donkey. This is the old joke of Watana Siam, the national anthem of Siam. The painter is playing the joke. Then here you see the Emperor Michael Palaeologus. Let's see if we can go to him. In his wonderful cloth of gold and so forth, and the form of the Greek crown. And then you see the Medici princeling with all of the members of his family, including in the very front, a black slave, uh, beautifully presented, his features, the color of his skin, with admiration. And up at the top, you can see a Medici villa. I was going backwards. And this is the self-portrait of Benozzo Gozzoli, the painter, placed within the painting, along with a whole lot of other portraits of Greeks and Latins. And there again, you see the fortified villa of the Medici, the robber baron's castle out in the countryside, because the Medici are the new Ghibellines. They're not the Guelphs for the sense of the Republic. And what is interesting is that all of these wealthy, noble people are on the ground level. And then there's a raised part by the altar. And there you see the cowherd, and you see the shepherds, and you see the donkey. It's the world upside down of Mary's Magnificat, which the Florentines used as their argument for being a republic and not a principality. And here you see the Virgin. This painting is no longer in the chapel, there's a copy of it instead. But the baby is laid on the ground in the way that Saint Brigitta had seen in her vision. And if you look, you see that the trees are being cut because this is December. And Brunetto Latino describes from Palladius's agriculture and architecture that that is when you need to cut the wood and let it season, not in the spring when the sap is rising, which would distort it. And with him, you see John the Baptist, and this goes back to the Jacob of San Gimignano's life of our Lord Jesus Christ, where as children the two are together. And here's a wonderful portrait and Ferrara sculpture of Bessarion with his great beard. And this is a painting in Urbino by Piero della Francesca, painted in 1468, 1470. The thing that fascinates me about Piero della Francesca is his name. It's not Piero del Francesco. It's not named after his father. His father is unknown. His mother has borne this child out of wedlock. And he will later also do the wonderful painting of the Madonna del Parto above his mother's tomb, where she, with her cloak, which is like the cloak also of the Misericordia that we talked about in our second Bessarion Zoom talk. And here you see the patriarch, the emperor with the purple slippers. This figure is Muslim, uh, perhaps Mehmed II, who conquers Constantinople. And here is Christ flagellated in the lost Jerusalem of the lost kingdom of Jerusalem. And here you see three figures, one of the house of the Montefeltro, and the other, let's see if I can get back to it. Um, and okay, sorry about this. We had some dreadful problems when we were doing the okay, let's it's Cardinal Bessarion, and sorry about this. Okay, let's see if I can. Yes. Let's go back. This is the figure of Cardinal Bessarion and younger. And the motto on the painting is Convenerunt in unum, and it's about the conspiring of the Jews against Christ. And in a sense, it's a political comment about the conspiracies of this time, these hopeless ventures for crusades. And here we see Bessarion's hand in Greek and in Latin. And the Latin is in this beautiful humanist script. And here are his notes for the speech. And here is a printed text of his work, elegant. And this is the house in which he may have written these. This is a house in Rome that I found when I was 21 with my first child in my arms, whom I've now lost, Richard. But to me, this was a moment of paradise. Inside are the wonderful frescoes, now rather dilapidated, and these wonderful Fibonacci curves with pomegranates and so forth, which I keep painting here in this library, in this garden, and also on the cradles of the Roma babies. And this is a photograph of the time of Mussolini when the house was elegantly furnished, and which was the way it still was when I saw it all of those many years ago. And again, more of the frescoes, and here another scene nearer to our time. And these are the paintings I do of the pomegranates. And if any one of you wants one, I will gladly send you one. And that was our library. And what was interesting is that Cardinal Bessarion8 is used as the model for St. Jerome in his study. This is an early painting by Colantonio in Naples, 1445, 1446, where it's the compilation of two stories of the Desert Fathers. One is of St. Jerome, and the other is of a different saint, but with a name rather like his, who, in his legend, takes the thorn out of the paw of a lion, who then befriends him and lives with him in harmony. And it's quite charming. And the chair, if you remember, we didn't do the Purple Gospels in the Bessarion, but I did a talk in San Lorenzo on the Purple Gospels from the Black Sea area. And you will see this kind of chair used in Ravenna and so forth for priests and for St. Luke and so on in those miniatures. And here is another wonderful St. Jerome in his study by Antonio da Fabriano. This painting is in America, but with all of the writing implements and his scarlet robe and hat, that was more recent. St. Jerome would not have been wearing those kinds of robes. And here is Domenico Ghirlandaio, St. Jerome, in the Ognissanti in Florence, and with that wonderful oriental carpet, which was always prized in the Latin West, despite the Muslims being their enemies. And these all reflect back not only to St. Jerome, but also to Cardinal Bessarione. Here is Filippino Lippi with St. Jerome in his study, and it's a beautiful painting. That one is the one that's in America. And even Julian of Norwich's Cardinal Adam Easton is shown as St. Jerome, Cardinal Bessarion, in an antiphonary of his office of the Visitation. We've just had the Feast of the Visitation a few days ago. And this manuscript was produced in Venice, which was why you get that association. And I can't resist giving the feminist versions of St. Jerome in his study. Here with Birgitta of Sweden in her study, writing her revelations, her new Bible for Europe, for peace. And because she and her associates the hermit bishop Alfonso of Jaen, and Adam Easton were very aware that Jerome could not have done the Vulgate Bible without the funding and the assistance, learning Hebrew, already having Greek and Latin, of the two noble Roman ladies, Paula and her daughter Eustacia. This reminds me of Juliana Dresvina's book, Thanks for Typing, how the women get whitewashed out of the stories. But we have these wonderful images in women's manuscripts. Hildegard of Bingen, Birgitta of Sweden, Catherine of Siena, Julian of Norwich's, Chaucer's second nun, and also Christine de Pizan, of women also as the writers of the book, which, as Gerhard Ladner showed, with the gospel writers, reflects God writing the book of the creation. It is a sacred task. And here is a letter that we have Bessarion writing to the Doge of Venice, who is Cristoforo Moro, giving him his library because he so wants to preserve Greek learning in the Latin West in the face of the loss of Constantinople. And Christopher Morrow, if you read the Variorum of Shakespeare's edition of Shakespeare's Othello, you will find Morrow, more black, is Othello, and so forth. And Bessarion was a great scientist as well as a philosopher, and had studied Pythagorean mathematics and so on. And this is one of the printed books that's derived from that learning. And he presented to a compagnia in Venice this reliquary of the Holy Cross, which contained a piece of the Holy Cross, and which was restored here in Florence by the Opificio delle Pietre Dure. And Bellini paints it with members of the confraternity to whom he gave it. He was also a member of it. And then one of Bellini's students also paints the painting. It was so important. But Gentile Bellini also part of the Scuola della Carità Reliquary. Then that was done in 1472. Then in 1479, 1481, takes himself off to the court of the Sultan Mehmed II, because the Venetians are not interested in a crusade against Constantinople. They're interested in trade with Islam, with its great wealth. So poor Cardinal Bessarion was not receiving much help in that score. He also participated, uh, Urbino with Federico da Montefeltro in 1472, 1474. We have the painting of the Stendado Urbino with John the Baptist, and this figure here is Cardinal Bessarion. And also we have his portrait now in the Louvre, but which formerly was in Federico da Montefeltro's exquisite studiolo in Urbino, where not only is the member of the court a scholar, but also the prince Urbino of Urbino sees himself as a scholar. Although when I went to Urbino, which is so beautiful, with my Italian landlord, he pointed out to me this was built with the labor of slaves. And here we see the Urbino John the Baptist. And here we see, this is Anne Babetti's book on the Palaiolo embroideries for the baptistry in Florence, which were carried out in 1466, 1488. And the iconography of both is the same. John the Baptist on a raised height on rocks, which are just about the same, preaching. And then when Bessarion was in Paris at the court of the king, trying to persuade him to have this crusade against Constantinople, Guillaume Fichet, who is the Chancellor of the Sorbonne, presents this copy of the Rhetorica to Cardinal Bessarion. And this manuscript is not in the humanist Italian style at all. It's in the Gothic French style, which actually was copying Islamic exquisite traceries and so on, and their manuscripts with their natural images. And because when you have an enemy, you imitate him. The French high waisted dresses, the time of Napoleon, were copied in Jane Austen's England and so on. The Red Scare in America, the Americans themselves became so uniform, like the members of the Communist Party. And then we have the funerary chapel. It had already been designed by Bessarion, where he would be buried in 1472 in Santi Apostoli, painted by Antonizzo Romano. And then they built another chapel inside it. So it's very difficult to see the frescoes. They've only been recently discovered, but they are wonderful. And here you have the Madonna, and then you have the figures. This is the miracle of San Gargano. And here you see the gorgeous priestly vestments. And those in the black, wait a moment, go back. Those are the Basilian monks, of which Bessarion himself was one, plus these gorgeous pieve with the pendant at the back. And these are the Latin monks, these are the Eastern monks, the Greek ones, and so forth. I seem to be going backwards. And then this is the scene of paradise with the ranks of the angels. And of course, it is part of it is damaged because of the rebuilding. And here more of the angels. And what I suggest is for further reading, George Eliot's Romola. She came to Florence and she studied intensely the time of Savonarola. Her anti-hero is Tito, who is this Greek scholar who allows his father to continue in slavery, does not rescue him, and his father for that will kill him. And a wonderful novel I've been reading for the second time, Rose Macaulay's The Towers of Trebizond, about the Black Sea, this exotic landscape. And this introduction by Joanna Trollope for the Folio Society is splendid. And then also my talk on the Purple Gospels, which were around Sinopia, again on the Black Sea near Trebizond, and my living to here with the Roma from Constanza on the Black Sea in Romania has taught me to appreciate the Greek world, the Romanian Orthodox. It is corrupt, all churches tend to become corrupt, but the faith of the ordinary people is so strong, and their spiritual exercises extremely severe, modeled on those of the Desert Fathers. I also wanted to talk, as Alex brought up when we broadcast this, but failed to record it, the golden apples. I was very fortunate when I was at Princeton, a junior faculty member, a woman in the first generation of women teaching and so forth. Wasn't very comfortable. But what was wonderful would be the scholars at the Institute for Advanced Study were interested in my work on pilgrimage. Victor Turner asking me to come and share with him my research and so forth. Millard Meese, because I had seen how important his book was, the Florence and Siena after the Black Death, painting in Florence and Siena after the Black Death, inviting me when he was busily finishing his last works while dying of cancer, and being open to discussing and praising my work, and signing a copy of his book for me. And it is that sense of the academy outside of the university, with its greater freedom and its willingness to. William Heckscher was a great friend of mine, and Charlotte Heckscher was my son's girlfriend for a time. And to be a part of that world which treasured the work of Janssen, of Einstein, and so forth, um, was a golden world. And I'm very grateful that I was even allowed to be a part of it. And which is what I'm trying to continue here. And we were so grateful that when we gave this Zoom talk, one of the participants, she only had her name AIM, and I don't know who she really was, but she was from the Warburg Institute in London, which had invited me to send them copies of my papers because they filed their library not with alphabetical authors' names and so forth, but with concepts. And she was speaking from a beautifully furnished room with great elegance. And this is the kind of my sense of the Academia Bessarion. It's at all levels at once. It's the great scholars, and it is also the illiterate Roma with their oral storytelling, their vast library of oral stories, which are the stories that come out of Shakespeare, out of Chaucer, out of Apuleius, that we are humanity, and we are humanity at its most, in a sense, most beautiful. But it is only beautiful if it is morally correct, if it is ethical. I can understand my Italian Florentine landlord shuddering at the slavery in Urbino, because Florence never accepted really the Medici princes, the sense of the elite. It I'm used in my convent to bow my head in subservience to people of rank. The Florentines never do this, and I admire them for it. So I think tonight well, this is morning is dawn in Florence, like that dawn that Fra Angelico paints at the Annunciation in one of the cells in San Marco. I think we can end this talk, which I do believe I did record this time, I hope. And I do thank you for your patience with me. And so let's and interrompe condivisione and termina. My computer speaks Italian, and termina riunioni per tutti.